It's said that a really good dialogue exchange can be just as exciting as physical action. That's because dialogue is physical. The reader is always seeing it in their mind's eye, happening as action on the page. This video is for Wordstock 4, an Authortube collaborative event where a lot of writers, professional and non, talk about their own unique take on this subject, creating a virtual seminar. I hope you'll give them all a watch and subscribe. Helping our community grow benefits every one of us. And if you want to learn more about creating dialogue, stick around. Dialogue that's unbelievable is one of the most common reasons novels get rejected. I also believe readers have a strong sense of bad dialogue. They feel it when dialogue sizzles on the page. They also feel something when it's boring. Readers don't buy books to hear the same kind of conversations they get from friends, family, or at work. They pay for an experience that's an escape from their normal routine conversations. Human beings can be the most fascinating or the dullest creatures. It's a personal choice as well as their right. As writers, however, if you populate your world with a lot of boring characters, the reader also has a right to close the book and walk away. And that's because what people accept from others in their everyday life, they don't devote the same effort and time to their leisure activities. Meaning, if given a choice, few of us would deal with the mundacities of small talk. And so we arrive probably at the biggest key to making all dialogue sing on the page. And that's to remember each character in the exchange has the power and focus of their own personal intentions. In every scene, the point of view character enters a situation with the intention of meeting a specific goal. They have a specific reason, or possibly something to gain. So does every other character in the exchange, where their goals and intentions differ, where opinions differ, even when race or belief systems differ. Characters, like people, will begin to get snarky or nasty towards one another. And as we writers well know, all it takes is a little push and the boundaries of society begin to break down. When writers say that good dialogue is tough, combative, or adversarial, does it mean everyone is arguing all the time? There are major disagreements and minor disagreements, but it's not always a straight-on argument. There's usually a hint of a problem that could get worse as the plot begins to boil. Here are some good questions to ask before writing dialogue. Number 1, what is the chief issue between the speakers? 2, what happened in their day or lives that might cause them to be annoyed? And 3, how does the conversation exacerbate those problems? Maybe they just aren't in the mood to have whatever discussion the other person wants them to engage in. It's possible they want to discuss something else entirely. Let's look at some examples. He, guess what happened at work today? She, can we please talk about something other than work? He, I got a promotion. She, I quit. There's no competing with your job. In the first sentence, he asks her to guess what happened at work. Notice she doesn't give a direct response, which gives us another ingredient worth noting. Some of the best dialogue is indirect. She answers his question with another question, pleading to talk about something other than his job. Good dialogue is often indirect. It often doesn't follow what came before it in a logical succession. Then he ignores her plea completely. He tells her that he got a promotion. Another key to good dialogue is that most people don't really want to hear what the other person has to say. They have in their mind the subject they want to talk about. They may pause politely to allow the other person to speak, but they aren't really listening to what the person is saying. And in this case, that builds up to her saying that she quits because she can't compete with his job. We immediately understand there's a history between the two, and their lives are out of balance. Both of these speakers are coming into the conversation with completely different intentions. Those intentions are running in opposite directions, causing opposition. Opposition creates interest for the reader. It also shows that even light disagreements can be used to good effect. Confrontational dialogue can be low-key. 1. The main character can have a disagreement with their boss. 2. Guilt trips by a family member. 3. Subtle manipulation by the villain. Let's look at another example. 2 people who were once friends meet at the local supermarket. She: "Hi, how are you?" He: "I'm great." She: "And the family?" He: "Everyone is well." What happens next is they tell one another how good it was to see each other, and they go their own separate ways. The reader is left to wonder who these 2 people are. Aside from the fact that they had a former acquaintance, neither of the speakers revealed anything about themselves. There's nothing that characterizes who they are or what their history may have entailed. In other words, there's no story here. Let's take that same exchange and make a few changes. She: "How are you?" He: "You have a hell of a nerve." She: "I'm only asking because." He: "You didn't ask when I needed you." The dialogue here is a stronger disagreement. It's also not predictable. It starts the same. She's asking how he is. But now his response is both unexpected and angry. The third line, whatever she starts to say about why she's asking, is cut off by the fourth response. "You didn't ask when I needed you." The reader now begins to see there's a history between the two, and for at least one of them, the relationship didn't end well. He's still harboring resentment, and if they walk away from each other this time, the reader won't want them to part. What the reader wants is for them to continue because they want to know what happened. This is because the story is now moving forward. There's a few things we can learn from this exchange. Number 1, dialogue, especially when a character is angry, reveals things about the speaker and the relationships. Often characters don't realize how they sound to others. They're also not objective enough to hear what they're revealing about themselves because they're too busy trying to make their point. Secondly, dialogue should either characterize, move the story forward, or both. And 3, dialogue is not overheard speech. Seldom is overheard dialogue usable without being tweaked to fit a character or a situation. Conclusions: dialogue is an invented language, conveying not what is actually said by the characters, but what is meant, and that meaning is fueled directly by their intentions, what they want to achieve. This can be conveyed through an undertone or subtext. It doesn't necessarily hide the meaning, although it can be very subtle. However, it often has more meaning for the speaker than what's conveyed through their words, and as such, does not always have to be spelled out for the reader right away. In fact, allowing the reader to think about some things for themselves is often better, because when the reader can put their imagination into something, they actually enjoy it more. As a side note, that third line where she's cut off from speaking, the interruption by another person is signified by 2 dashes at the end of the sentence. If she were pausing or trailing off into thought, this would be shown by 3 consecutive periods, or that ... we so often see. Another reason confrontational dialogue is so important. In the midst of traffic, most people are beeping or getting upset if someone slows down. However, if there's an accident, those same people will suddenly put aside whatever it is they're rushing to in order to get a look. In your story, as the hero marches toward their victory, there's always going to be accidents waiting ahead. Dialogue that doesn't agree or reveals things about a character's inner feelings can act as portents which project potential pitfalls, increase stakes, and add to the growing sense of danger in the life of the hero, even from close friends and members of the same team. A common difficulty when most of us first come to dialogue is finding ways to make each character sound unique. We see and hear the character's tonal qualities in our imagination, but there can often be a gap on how that translates to the written page. The result is most characters will sound very similar to the reader. Another mistake is giving characters a lot of slang that's become cliché through everyday use. This is especially problematic when writing younger characters, and the writer hopes to appear trendy by using slang that's common for the current generation. This can be doubly bad because it's not only a cliché, but it'll date your story. Why is that a bad thing? After all, we are writing characters in the period in which we live, right? If your intention is to write a novel that's essentially a love letter to the 80s or 90s or early 2000s, it may work fine. However, in trying to be current with slang or trends popular to the current period in which we live, it may limit the shelf life of your novel. Just pick up a novel written during a time before you were born. Try to make sense of the trends that were current then and see how out of place it feels. And if the trend happens to be a passing fad or too distinctive to that period, it may not even make sense any longer. One of the most common forms of slang is the word It's meant to pause, to give the speaker time to think. However, it's become a cliche in its own right. When I was a kid, I had an aunt who had an interesting term every time she paused to think, and she would use it pretty darn frequently. She would insert the word whatchacallit. She paid no distinction to whether it referred to a person, a place, or a thing. It was a universal term she used for everything. In writing, this is called a speech tag. Speech tags are a great way to add distinctive traits to a character's dialogue. These are distinctive words or phrases unique and particular to a character. This can be as simple as looking through a dictionary or a thesaurus for words that fit a character's intellect. And this will differ depending on whether you want to sound intelligent, dull-witted, or somewhere in between. It could also mean a character is trying to sound intelligent or even hide their intellect to fit in with a certain crowd. I had a friend growing up who liked to toss around what my grandmother called $10 words. The interesting thing was, once you got to know this guy, there were literally only 5 or 6 of those words. At the time, I figured he learned them from his parents and used them as a way of making an impression. And just like my aunt, he used them as much as possible, curating his speech so he could insert them pretty frequently. Years went by and I didn't see this guy for a long time. And then one evening I ran into him, and during the course of a conversation and getting reacquainted with one another, I noticed those same 5 or 6 words were still dropped on a regular rotation within his speech. How did those words characterize him? Even though they initially seemed to make his vocabulary appear more vast than it actually was, ideally, each of our characters should have their own private dictionary for dialogue. And it doesn't have to be overly lengthy. Characters, like people, have their favorite words that they use quite often. Speech tags are one place where slang can be used to good effect. But wait a minute, didn't I just say slang can date your novel? Yes, if the slang is too commonplace or becomes a product of the time in which it's popular. Let's look at a couple of ways to freshen slang. Consider how the word cool evolved into chill. Is there another word that can be substituted for common slang that upgrades it, makes it fresh again, and unique to the characters populating your world? Abbreviating words is also a way to give them a fresh face. Radical has been abbreviated to rad. Are there some unique words you found for your characters which can be upgraded or abbreviated? Think about those old sayings your parents and grandparents have thrown around for years. I'll bet if you sifted through the dusty words and phrases from your family's past, there's some gems in there you could upgrade as well. Watch old movies and TV shows and see if you can pick out some speech tags from a bygone era that might be upgraded as well. And don't be afraid if what you come up with sounds a bit out there or even a little folksy. Throughout time, various towns and regions have had their own sayings and local speech tags, just as they've had their local legends. And the more unique you make it, the less of a chance there is that it'll become dated quickly. On the other hand, if your novel becomes popular, you may end up contributing to popular slang. Shakespeare invented over 1,700 words in his time, many that are still in common use today. And often he did this simply by changing nouns into verbs or verbs into adjectives and connecting words never used together previously. In other words, he took what was commonplace and upgraded them into something fresh. I hope this video has given you some food for thought, and remember to watch the other videos in this series. They'll be uploading all day today throughout the day. and we have a lot of great people and a lot of variations on this. So give them a look. Remember to subscribe. And until next time, take care of yourselves and keep those keyboards clacking.